All right, we'll come back to the weight loss piece, but I want to come back to the microbiome and light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like there's two different pieces to this: the light affecting the microbiome on the skin, and then actually penetrating and affecting the internal microbiome. So let's talk about those two different pieces, because this is fascinating and not an area a lot of people get into.
It's my favorite. So we are going into a rabbit hole of pleasure for me right here. There was recently a study that was published. So it was actually published not a few years ago, but it was in the medical journals here and in Europe. They were putting it into the journals as articles, and I was blown away because it's things that when you work with the microbiome, you know about, but the public never gets. And honestly, the medical community doesn't either. So there was this big one that was released, and I can give you the link if you want to post it underneath, about superbugs in hospitals. We've all heard of those, right? You don't want to go to the hospital because they have the superbugs, and sometimes you can't avoid it, but ideally you avoid. Well, the findings were that the superbugs were not in the hospital. The superbugs were already in our microbiome as normal bacteria. But when you go to the hospital, the lights and the sounds within the hospital transform our normal bacteria into superbugs.
Wow, this is totally new for me. Keep going.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, right? And so the light and the sound literally changes our bacteria constantly. Now, if you take that to fungus, and this is my newest venture, I've been nonstop researching. If you take this into the fungal realm, what are we seeing across the board? We are seeing so many cases of mold toxicity. It is uncanny, right? Now, when I go to places like Venice in Italy and places that are high mold, they don't traditionally have mold issues with people, even though there's black mold, right? And we've all known this. You meet a family where they had black mold in the house, there'll be a few individuals that got very sick, maybe one or a couple, but not all. So why is that? Well, that got me thinking. And then, I spent a lot of time in the indigenous lands. Well, there was a study that was released for the drumming in the indigenous lands and how the mycelium, the mushroom, right, the body underneath the soil, would only activate when the indigenous were playing their drums. It's a very specific drum, but it's the same note across the board. So what would happen when you have your drum circle is that the mycelium activate and they take nutrition throughout the whole forest, but only with certain sounds. Now, what do we have that's so different now in our houses? Very different sound and light than 50 years ago, incredibly so, right? We have all this ambient noise from the refrigerators and other devices, right? We don't even notice it because it's so normal for us. Then we have all these lights as well, which really affect not only our hormones, but really our bacteria and fungus. But yeah, so there's been a lot of research in that field. And if you take it into other areas of sound medicine, like the 128 hertz, which activates if you hear or you hum or you play it in your environment, it produces nitric oxide in your body, which is incredible. So there's a lot there that's going on with the bacteria, the fungi, and I think phages really coming out next.
Coming back to that drumming story piece. So when certain beats are played by the drums, it affects the fungi in the soil. If you take that story even further, do they end up ingesting those when they grow, or how does that impact them as humans, or does it?
No, it speaks more towards how we are one part in nature and that our natural acts actually affect nature in wonderful ways, right? So, us playing the drums, if it was us, then the rest of the forest gets bathed in nutrition when we do that. And it needs us there, right? Nature is wise. There's never any plant in nature that isn't needed in that forest. We may not know why, but we would be part of that, right? As well. So when we take people out of forests, like take the Batwa, the pygmy population that belong in the Bwindi impenetrable forest in parts of Uganda and Rwanda, they were all removed 30 years ago, which means they're not drumming there anymore. They can't even go in without getting killed, right? So they're not drumming anymore. So how is the forest being affected? Well, very clearly, it's not going to get as much nutrition. But yeah.
And when that comes to us in the West in a more practical way, we have our microbiome, we have a virome.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have fungi that are in our gut making up, that whole ecosystem?
Yes. Last I checked, we had 247 different kinds of fungi. There may be more that have been discovered now. Most of those are beneficial. So I do think a large part of the issues that we've had with Candida and some of the more pathogenic are due to the fact that we don't have as many of the good, right? That was certainly the case with our bacteria and definitely the case with the virome, right? Which is 37,000 times bigger than the microbiome. It's massive. But yes, yeah, definitely. We do require good fungi. And traditionally we would get a lot of that through dairy consumption in regions that do that. Not all cultures, of course, ate dairy, but a lot of them did. And a lot of the cheeses, there's an interesting fungus within blue cheese that counteracts the black mold. So there's a number of different things that could be factors there. But yes, to answer your question, there's absolutely beneficial and pathogenic within that biome as well.
So is a piece of this then when we're humming or listening to music of a certain hertz, that it's having a positive impact on the fungi in our body?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's certain wavelengths that seem to be much better. I'm not a musician, so I'm not I'm not in this field to speak on properly, but I do know that the tune that music was tuned to before 1935 was a very different hertz than currently done. And although listening to music in general is calming for humans, the benefits for the former, which I think is 432, I'd have to double check, I think it's 432, is monumental for what it does for our parasympathetic nervous system. And I think we can bring that in further, right? So many people are in thought medicine, right? And you can think yourself better. And as someone who used to be sick, that can honestly be pretty insulting, folks, if you haven't been sick. Like it really can, because no one thinks themselves that way or gets themselves there on purpose. But we can certainly, there's no question that we can get out of health issues through changing the way we approach life and the way that we think and the way we reframe things, because people have done it. It's Herculean. It's super hard. It was too tough for me. It was only part of what I did. Had it been fully successful, I would be shouting it from the rooftops. It is for some folks. I was not that good, but but I do think we can go internal as well and see that aspect, because we do have a vibration to our thoughts as well. Right. So there's very good studies on what we watch in terms of movies and shows and how that impacts our nervous system and our immune system. But I do think it goes much further than that into our internal world as well.
And with a lot of these, you can see how there's two different sides to all of them, whether it be dietary and things that are toxic we want to avoid and things that are healthy to bring in. And we can apply this to sound. We can apply it to movies and different media we're taking in. So where I want to go from there is when it comes to these sounds and the fungi in our body, are you somebody that's playing music of that hertz, like as you go to sleep to nourish your fungi, or how do you do that in a practical sense? And then from the other way around, because we're in this modern society and we do have things like air conditioning, refrigerators, and we can't necessarily turn those off, is it just about putting that music in the environment to offset it? Or how do we use this sound piece in a practical way in the modern environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's always the most important thing, right? It's so fun to learn about these things, but if we can't apply them, what's the point? So I think the best way to go about it is to spend as much time as humanly possible in nature, really. Traditionally, if you go to houses that were built in the 1800s, there was always a tuberculosis room, which was a screened in porch where the beds would be placed if someone was ill. And what you get with that is you get the sounds of nature, right? The birds, if anyone listening is on a farm, you'll know this from the time you were born. The chickens are the first ones up every day. Their circadian rhythm goes first, and it actually wakes up the plants and us as well, and the other animals on the farm. So there's a circadian rhythm to nature that pulls us in, and it's done through sound and light. So that's very important. We also, in light medicine, which is just so fascinating, there's a new quote unquote vitamin that they're calling. And lots of people used to kind of jest about this, but it's actually true now. It's been shown. And that is that the light that comes through the leaves of a forest, the green light that comes in, has a very specific effect on our body, a very positive effect on our body. Now, many cultures like Japan, they have forest bathing that they traditionally do at least once a week, where they basically go into the forest all day, right? But this is incredibly good for us. So what I try to get people to do, one, we stop bringing in the things that are problematic. So most people who are ill, especially in America, they are broke. They are living on the favor of someone else, right? And so you can't always turn off things like refrigerators and all of that. But what you can do is stop listening to music that isn't tuned to 432 hertz. You can open your window or spend more time outside. So you can be laying down on a porch or on the grass on a blanket if you can get outside. So spending lots and lots of time outside is really very beneficial to that. And then you can get tuning forks too. So like when I need to boost someone's nitric oxide, if they like things like tuning forks, we can get them a 128 tuning fork, and then they can play with that, and that's going to help. So you can go about it that way. But a lot of it is what you avoid. It's avoiding, certain shows on the TV and certain types of music and things like that.
Coming back to our superbugs in the hospital and the lighting there, creating those from what we already have in our microbiome, how do we, in a practical sense, use natural light to enhance the microbiome on the skin, in our guts? And yeah, I'll have you start there, and we'll go a bit deeper if we need to.
It's so important. It's so important. The light before 10 a.m. down regulates our histamines more than anything else that has been studied. So a lot of people with histamine disorders think they can't go out in the sun because the sun can make it worse. Well, it can if it's really hot. Yeah, absolutely. Because heat increases cortisol and that increases histamines, but not if it's before 10 a.m. And if you're somewhere very, very hot, go early, go at sunrise, right? Sunrise also, so that morning light, that triggers your feel-good chemicals. So someone who's just waking up at home, scrolling through their phone, listening to a TV, getting the kids ready, getting in the car, running errands, then going to work, good luck getting your feel-good chemicals processed. You have to get it in your eye and not through glass, right? So you really need direct daylight, or I should say, daylight. It doesn't have to be sunny, right? So if you're in the UK, don't despair. You're fine. It can be very cloudy or rainy, but you do need that natural light in your eye. So there's a couple of different factors there. You need both the eye and the skin. The more skin exposure, the better. Now, one question I always had personally was Nordic countries and Arctic countries. How did they not get seasonal affective disorder in the winter? Well, it turns out firelight, which is what is used in those places during the winter, will do most of this for you. So having an actual fire in the house in the morning is great. That does a lot too, or in the evening as well. The microbiome and the light is shifted. So getting a lot of sun on your skin each day will shift the microbiome more than diet will. So as much as I work with diet, because that's something I can actually control, with folks, the daylight is incredibly important in order to keep that microbiome very healthy. And that means a lot of skin area, right? That really does mean not wearing a ton of clothes or taking off what you can so that you get as much sun exposure as possible. And on the flip side of that, not using the sunscreens and the hats and the sunglasses. The sunglasses are really problematic for the microbiome.
And when it comes to the gut microbiome specifically, does having the stomach area exposed to the light
Yes.
have specific benefit? Talk more about that.
Yes, it does. In fact, I just had someone yesterday, I was telling about this because I don't tend to see the emergency cases. I'm not in emergency medicine. So, but the bloating and the stomach issues I tend to see is with a soft belly without sharp pain. Anytime you have a hard belly, like a basketball, you need to go and be seen by someone. It's usually not great. So they came in, there was a new client with this, a rock hard belly. And I was like, please go get seen by someone. But until you do, get out in the sun and take your shirt off, because the light directly on the stomach actually makes a massive difference, really. And I think that's why in many cultures the belly was exposed. Look at traditional Hinduism, right? They would practice a lot of this. They would use things like mustard oil in the belly button and then light on the stomach, especially for women. So yes, it seems silly or trite, but actually it shifts the microbiome massively to have the light on very specific areas.
And how quickly does the microbiome change when we start avoiding some of the stuff we've been talking about, including others, and really making an effort to improve it?
It can actually change radically in 3 days. Now, I want to couch that with saying, or buffer that, with saying that if you're dealing with a severe disability, you're not going to have any difference that you feel in 3 days. It's going to be like 6 months at least. But technically speaking, if we test parts of the microbiome, we change your diet. That's all we have to do. In 3 days, it is radically different. So there's been some studies with like the Hadza and some of the other hunter-gatherers where someone from our culture will do a microbiome test and then go stay with them for 3 days and do another one. And it has radically shifted. So I think that's why we see something a lot of us have experienced of going over to another country and eating all sorts of foods that would usually cause weight gain or tummy troubles, and instead you're losing weight and you feel great and you have no problem. The way that the food is eaten, the way it's processed, and the amount of light and walking, all of that has a huge impact on the microbiome. So 3 days technically.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
We've been told to push fiber and that it's good for bacterial diversity, but diversity doesn't equal health. What equals health is what bacteria are in the gut. We like to think the microbiome is the gut. It's not. It's everything. Getting a lot